Hi everybody. Today I'd like to take another look at the game History of the World. 7 different companies have published this title over the years. I think Z-Man Games produced the last version in 2018, but I'm going to cover the Avalon Hill 1991 edition in this video because it happens to be the one I own. It's the version with the most chrome. It's the one that comes with tons and tons of plastic minis. Any generalizations I make in this video should be applicable across the board. However, it's the same excellent game whoever makes it. So with this video, I will briefly explain the rules before getting into mods, adjustments, tips, and suggestions. I will end the video with some gaming experiences and closing thoughts for those of you who haven't tried it yet. It's basically a tremendously thematic, straightforward area controller that's divided into 7 distinct rounds or mini games known as epochs. The goal of the game is to score the most points across the sum total of these game rounds. This is accomplished with die rolls. Minimal complexity. It's surprisingly simple, and yet there are a couple of peculiarities that I feel stand out, and I will highlight these as I go along. Let me show you how it all works. By the way, the official rules are only 12 pages. I got them down to 3 pages with a customized rule summary. The setup is easy. Each player selects an army color. There are 6 different ones available. You put one of your pieces on the score track. I have homemade score sheets as well that I pass out to every player, and they look like this. You might notice I also include an 8th Epoch expansion as a matter of course with my set, but more on that later. If you need a shorter game, 7 rounds is fine. Next, each player gets 3 greater event cards and 7 lesser event cards. These are shuffled out randomly. Then an Epoch 1 card gets dealt to each player randomly, and that's the entire setup. I simplify the official rules with respect to Epoch card draws. There is a reason for this, and I will explain why in a minute, but the Epoch cards tell each player what civilization they get to control for the current round, and they list the turn order for that round. They tell the player where to set up, how many armies they get to expand with, and whether or not their civ starts with a capital or naval units. And so now we have arrived at the first major unconventional aspect of the game. Its main quirk, you might say, because as soon as you look at the list of available civilizations for each epoch, you notice that they are wildly disparate in terms of potential power. In some cases, certain civs might even be twice as powerful as other ones, or more. So how is this fair, you might ask? The response is, it isn't. In fact, it's the opposite. After all, world history wasn't fair. Neither is life itself. The game models this truth. The hope is, over the course of several rounds, several epochs, each player will experience the ups and downs of fate by sometimes being stuck with a vagabond empire, while other times taking the reins of a superpower. It's all supposed to balance out in the end, more or less. Whether or not it does ultimately depends on how mindful players are of points and how plugged in they are to the overall game state as it develops. More on this later, because I have to talk about how the various powers get delegated from round to round by way of epoch card draws. Basically, the player with the least amount of points at the end of each round gets the best civ. The next round, best for them, hopefully. It sounds simple enough, and it should be in practice, yet the Avalon Hill official rules, the way they are written, snarl up the whole process with a clumsy, awkward explanation that just has too many words. I say if you have 4 players, for example, randomly draw 4 cards per epoch, last place gets first pick, and so on. That's it. If you have a group of veteran players, maybe, say last place gets first draw and gets one chance and one chance only to pass a civ card to another player, any player that gets passed a civ card does not draw themselves. The active player has to take the second draw no matter what. It's actually a really fun way to play because if you draw a middle power, what do? Do you risk a redraw? It could be worse, but then again, it could be a lot better. So this method just adds tension. The idea is with veteran players, the catch-up mechanic need not be so blatant, as runaway leaders are less likely due to greater player wherewithal. Like civ distributions alone need not determine the outcome of a game, as the have-nots unite to bash on their superiors. My main point is come up with a crystal clear way to delegate epoch cards from round to round. The official rules struggle to do this, in my opinion. So moving on. After a player gets their card and it's their turn, they set up their army and prepare for expansion. Players take the number of armies equal to the civ value, also known as the empire value, and that is the number on the upper right hand of the card. Place capital in the starting location if applicable. Not every civ starts with one. Place fleet markers in listed sea zones if you get any. If your civ springs up in a territory that's already occupied, it simply deletes any army and or fort from a previous epoch, and you begin by placing a new unit at the point of origin. At this point, a player consults their event cards. Each player may play up to 2 events, lesser or greater, during a single epoch, Two cards, if exactly the same, may not be combined. They have to be different. Some event cards are Epoch specific and must be played on their designated turns. And this is always an issue with rookie players. Specialized event cards not played during a named epoch by mistake are wasted by the owner. And this seems to happen at least once in every game I play in. So it's really helpful to take a second to remind people before they take a turn to double check their cards so they don't lose out on events. If this does happen, have fun listening to someone complain and moan about it for the rest of the game. So double check your cards every turn. What are they exactly? Mainly, they are bonuses to use in combat in the form of a great leader, or maybe you get a mini offshoot colony to place down that helps with point scoring. There are a wide variety of cool thematic random events to play every turn. In addition, some cards award coin tokens, and these may be redeemed for fleets, forts, or armies on a one-to-one basis. I made some of my own expansion cards too, and these are available to download on BGG, so feel free. I also laminated my cards because I want to keep this game in my collection, and I don't think I'll ever get tired of it. Anyway, the next step is expansion. Movement and adjacency are handled in a Risk-like fashion. You expand your civ into connected lands. Fleet markers act as stepping stones. If during expansion you cover 2 resource symbols in a single go, you are rewarded with a monument, and these can score points across multiple rounds for as long as you control the build site. Naturally, the act of expansion creates conflict and fighting, so players resolve combat in the following manner. If a player wants an occupied territory, they place an army in there to dispute the land, and as the attacker, they roll 2d6. They keep the highest result. The defender rolls 1d6. Highest roll wins, loser removes an army. A tie means both sides lose a piece, and that's an old broadsides and boarding parties rule right there. Anyway, that's how basic attacks work. However, a lot of factors can modify combat. Many different event cards modify die rolls. You can play elite troops that give attack bonuses. You might play a siege craft card that helps in attacks against fortifications. For example, difficult terrain also affects combat odds. Defender rolls an extra die if an attack crosses mountains, forests, or a strait, which are dotted lines on the map, or the Great Wall of China into the defender's land. A defender rolls 2 extra dice if an attack is amphibious, like the attacker uses a fleet as a stepping stone to attack an island or enemy coast. And forts add +1 to a defender's die roll, and they also soak an attacker's first hit before being destroyed. Not surprisingly, die roll modifiers are cumulative, although attackers and defenders always just select their highest single die result. So fighting is inevitable. The truth is, unless an empire expands aggressively at the expense of its neighbors, it will never be able to score the most points in a round. So the scoring system is really important for players to understand. It's innovative and yet a bit quirky, and it takes time to get used to. The weird/cool part about it is that all the different color-specific areas like India or China and Southern Europe change in value from epoch to epoch, and there are charts and little cardboard tiles you swap out on the map to display current point values. Furthermore, civilization expansion scores in areas according to 3 different measures of success known as presence, dominance, or control. You score presence if you have at least 1 army in an area, or you score dominance if you have at least 2 armies in an area and more than any other player, or you score control if you have at least 3 armies in an area with no other color present in said area. Like in Risk, if you ever sweep an area completely and control every territory, then you score bonus points, and these are listed on the victory point table. The point leader at the end of each round also draws a preeminence token as a reward, and this is basically a random amount of bonus points. And there is more. Players still have to account for all the infrastructure on the map. A player scores 2 points for every capital they control each round, and they also get 1 point for every monument and city they control each round. By the way, capitals flip to cities when they change hands, and cities get removed when captured. So as you might imagine, it's super helpful to come up with your own player aids and scoring charts to keep all this information straight and organized. These are available to download off BGG. One could make the argument that History of the World is really all about scoring, and it takes some time to get used to, but ultimately I argue it's worth it. So now I will talk about how well I think the game tends to play out in practice, but to be fair, I'll also mention some drawbacks to the system. Firstly, it's really fun to see how things develop from round to round, epoch to epoch. It's unpredictable and exciting to draw new powers, and the most rewarding aspect of the game for me is protecting fragments of an obsolete empire from a past epoch. so it continues to score much later in the game. And there's always a situation where an ancient piece lingers on the board for what seems to be an unbelievable period of time. And it's always amusing to see this in practice. Combat is simple and intuitive, and the remarkable thing is that it's resolved without buckets of dice and massive unit stacks. With unmodified rules, there is only one military unit allowed per territory after combat, so no real board clutter in this case. Now, let's talk about some drawbacks to the history of the world that I've seen. They include the following. Game length, it's long, and it gets longer the more people are involved. The two-player game is okay, but it doesn't work well unless each person controls multiple colors. If you have a lot of people, there may be significant downtime between turns for players. So you go and maybe like 15 minutes later, someone says, hey, Peter, I'm attacking you in Egypt. You go over to the table, roll 1d6, and that's it. Okay, like fast forward 15 minutes, nothing happens, and there may not be anything for you to do, literally, until you become the active player again. Also, if you play super competitively, you could make the argument that there are really not much actual choice or difficult decision making. It won't take long for veteran players to size up a strategic situation fairly quickly and accurately, and then commit to an optimal move. With point scoring in mind, of course you can do anything in theory, but not if you're trying to win. And this ties in with another issue that I have to mention. And if you get 6 people together with this game, trust me, not everyone is going to show up to play the way you think they should. So some people don't care about winning. They are there for the social experience, which is cool. And that's like me most of the time. Some people feel the need to settle old scores from previous rounds rather than do something more sane on their turns. And I have found that these types of gamers ultimately will determine whether or not your History of the World game or session will be purely competitive or something completely recreational. Games that end with a runaway leader usually have rookie or inexperienced players, but not always. Maybe every game is like this, but I'm the type of person that will enjoy the experience either way. But not everyone feels the same way. Okay, now for some mods, adjustments, and gameplay tips. I'll start with the minor ones first. The box comes with internal dividers to separate the minis by color, but not by epoch. So I lose the dividers and just organize the plastic with labeled baggies. And that way you don't have to fish through the piles of plastic every turn to deploy a new army. And I added some custom fleet markers with more modern ship graphics to use in later rounds because sails start to look weird in the late game. I also include some old school monument markers with my game to give them a bit more epoch specific detail, since all the plastic minis for them in my version look the same with the Avalon Hill edition. Official rule book includes some interesting advanced rules as well. And I always play with a naval control option. Active empires with navigation may place armies from their army pool directly onto their fleet markers. At the end of the turn, fleets with armies on them remain on the board, and they score a point per fleet at the end of the turn. Empires that spring up later in the epoch may challenge existing fleets with combat if they have navigation in the named sea zone. Combat is handled normally. The attacker rolls 2 dice and the defender rolls 1 die. These naval combat rules add more depth to the game, and I even made some of my own event cards to further modify naval combat. So that's fun. Another option is called the multiple army rule. I plan to use this next time I play in an opposed game. This variant allows players to deploy up to 3 figures in a territory. These may be 3 armies or 2 armies plus a fort. Multiple forts are not allowed. Combat is the same. The extra units just allow for extra casualties. I haven't tested this rule yet, but it definitely sounds interesting, and I have no idea why I keep forgetting to use it in game. I will make sure I remember for next time. However, the final mod I will cover, I always use, and it is an obvious addition. I am talking about an 8th extra epoch. One of the things about History of the World that many people who like the game lament is that it seems to end too abruptly just prior to the start of the First World War. You play it out and say, really? That's it? They couldn't think of a true 20th century scenario after covering all the famous and infamous empires of the world that came and went up until that point. They couldn't do something for the world wars. It just seems so strange to me. So 10 years ago, I designed an 8th epoch and uploaded the materials to BGG. It has rules for the French Third Republic, Fascist Germany, Imperial Japan, Soviet Union, the United States of America, People's Republic of China, and the United Kingdom. It works. I have played it opposed in large groups, so it's game tested, and nobody complained about it. In fact, the inclusion of an additional epoch helps to alleviate another common criticism of unmodified history of the world, and that is the British Empire is simply too powerful in the final turn. So in effect, the game just comes down to whoever gets control of 16 British units at the end of the game wins. I say not always, not necessarily, especially if you add another epoch. After I uploaded my fan-made Epoch 8 expansion, 8 real years later, someone uploaded a different version of E8 that some wargame journal published in 1995 that I didn't know about. Anyway, check it out. It looks good to me. It has cool ideas for lesser event cards and such that I lifted and incorporated into my own game. And I was really pleasantly surprised to see that contribution in the final section. And that's why I love BGG. Anyway, not to be outdone, I decided to come back with my own surprise. I just couldn't help myself. So recently I designed a 9th epoch, and it's a dystopian future type scenario where players control evil corporations in a post-apocalyptic setting. It uses pieces from Risk 2210 AD. There are nuke counters, lesser and greater event cards, and all the scoring tables and everything I included, so feel free to check it out in the file section of BGG. So when it comes to history of the world, my attitude is more is better, so why not? In conclusion, I feel History of the World Avalon Hill Edition is just completely awesome to play out. It's an unforgettable gaming experience every time. I recommend breaking up a session into 2 parts. Try playing 1 to 4 one day, perhaps, save everything, then play turns 5 to 7, 8, 9, whatever in a second sitting. I have envelopes in my box to store players' cards between games. The score sheets provide a record of everything as well as you play. And 1 or 2 cell phone pictures of the board is all it takes. And you can avoid burnout this way, and the whole experience will seem more epic in the end. But however you choose to game History of the World, with whatever edition, you are guaranteed at least a great story. It's highly replayable, so even if you get hosed with Empire Draws one game, the next time it'll be different. It's easy to understand and learn, but challenging at the same time to maximize all the intricacies of the scoring. So I highly recommend this title. If you haven't tried it, I think you don't know what you're missing. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more content coming soon.